and I'm certain I have the most complex presentation today because I have several sets of images that are linked together through hyperlinks, and so you'll see that happen as I speak. Right, so in an effort to grapple with what exhibition as matrix might mean in practical terms, I'm going to schematize the way that I discuss Phantom, an exhibition that I presented and curated earlier this year in Ruskin Gallery. The images that I'm going to show you are going to be given in a variety of renditions that become, in a variety of renditions, so the visual details become planes and frames and tonal areas, which hopefully will help me to expand the discussion of the installation shots. I hope that you'll see a holistic structure of elements rather than just a record of the exhibition. I'll also expand this idea of matrix to my studio practice by showing you an example of how work develops. And then finally, I'll give you a brief explanation about what's going on in my installation downstairs in the gallery. These images also, they're going to just be looping behind me as I speak. So here we go. Very early in the planning stages for Phantom, which was my second case study for my PhD, my supervisor suggested that I take into consideration the movement that takes place within Ruskin Gallery. After muttering curses at him for being the intellectual demon that he is, I started to think about this. How could I express the dynamic of a space within the exhibition? Ruskin Gallery is a space where people crisscross the expanse on the way to somewhere else, or move in and out of studio spaces where all sorts of experimentation and creativity takes place in a kind of energized undercurrent. It's a barn, a corridor, a huge void in the middle of creativity. Some would argue it's a horrible space and not a gallery at all. Others would say it's a wonderful, stimulating resource for students. How could I express all this through an exhibition while not letting it get in the way of the artwork? I started to trace the movement and features of the space in my mind and began to think of a gridded configuration. I then wondered if an exhibition could be something more than just contained by the space, but actually meld with the space to join in an actual amalgamation of architectural features and striations of artwork. It's been my practice when curating to situate artworks to the architectural features and characteristics of a gallery space. I knew continuing this practice would become important in locating the work within Ruskin Gallery and was potentially the starting point for visualizing this exhibition as matrix concept. I made the decision not to add any wall panels which would interfere with the flow of bodies in the space, so I was resigned to working with the four walls as they presented themselves. Not only did I want the artworks to relate to the architectural features, but I wanted the works to relate to each other and to bump and jostle each other, just like people coming and going through the gallery. Hidden away on the sequestered walls of the studios is another complex multiplicity of ideas and work in progress. I wanted some of that tension to be visible through Phantom as presented in the gallery space. So the things that seemed important to me in formulating the exhibition as matrix were the movement in the space, the thought exchange that happens around and in the gallery, and an interplay between architectural features and artworks. These were the things I felt important in order to conceptualize the exhibition as matrix, but I wanted to find out if anyone else had been working curatorially with this idea. Researching further into other curators who may have used an exhibition as matrix conceptual framework, I found the work of Mary Carmen Ramirez, Wortham Curator of Latin American Art and Director of the International Center for the Arts for the Americas at the Museum of Fine Arts, Houston. She describes an exhibition as Matrix as an exhibition model based on constellations. Two of her curatorial projects using this model were Encounters, Displacements at the Archer M. Huntington Art Gallery, College of Fine Arts at the University of Texas in Austin in 1992, and Inverted Utopias, curated with Hector Olea for the Museum of Fine Art, Houston, Texas in 2004. Inverted Utopias was the critically acclaimed exhibition which revolutionized the critical perception and art historical writing on Latin American art, and is probably the main reason why you see so much Latin American art these days in museums like Tate. In a presentation for the Frick Collection in 2014, Mary Carmen Ramirez explained that for Inverted Utopias, quote, the constellation model allowed us to assemble works by key developments or singular visions that exposed the nexus and oppositions between these artists, their works, and the specific context of art production. The malleability of this relational relative model provokes simultaneous readings of the selected works from comparative perspectives capable of grasping in one single glance historical, cultural, and formal traits with no artistic bias or hierarchies involved, end quote. Exposing the nexus and oppositions between these artists, their works, and the specific context of art production, while attempting to provoke simultaneous readings of the selected works from comparative perspectives, describes what I hoped would happen in my own conception of the exhibition as Matrix for Phantom. Through the act of positioning objects and fixing them in place, they transform a given locale into a cultural matrix where we as viewers are confronted with the task of deciphering the work's meaning. This quote by Ramirez suggests a complex model of situated subjects translating cultural objects within a localized network, essentially bringing audience into direct relationship with art objects and the artists who created them. Through a premise that asked the artist to create new work from chosen work for Phantom, which was a model based on my own practice, the artists in Phantom had a singular but networked presence. They each had unique studio practices, but as part of Phantom, they became part of the project network that reverberated within the parameters of the project. As an exhibition on translation, I wanted to realize this subject-object network relationship through the exhibition as Matrix for Phantom. I also wanted to highlight the act of translation that takes place within such a relationship. For my own work and my own practice, by continually using my work as an image archive or a matrix from which I can re-image, recycle, and resample, I'm building a kind of genetic code into the work. Here's an example of one such progression, which was the basis of my work for Phantom. This was a painting that I did back in 2018 before I started my PhD, never realizing I might have that opportunity. Photographing this...
2008.
Sorry, 2008. What did I say? Sorry. Imaging that piece, then I did this digital compilation and built this sort of digital matrix, this image matrix, which has become the basis for several pieces that I've created since starting my PhD. This was just previous to starting, this is 2 of a group of 5, where I reclaimed drawings that I had discarded as unsuccessful. And by using this reprographic process, I was able to make these new images. This is a larger scale piece, which became my chosen, selected piece for Phantom. And in this area right here, I isolated that area, photographing it, And using 7 layers of that image, I created these works for Phantom. This represents all 7 layers being printed at once, going through the printer at the same time. This one is where each of those layers were printed individually, and the presence of the printer becomes visible within the process. This then is an aerial X-ray of Stonehenge that I just happened to see while I was working on these works. And I was struck by how similar the imagery was to the pieces that I had just made. So I made this work. Then this is a hyperreplication of the original selected work that I've taken further into animated video. And all of these pieces were in Phantom. This visual legacy stimulates change to occur through a repetition that doesn't just repeat the same. Then the work that's on view downstairs in Ruskin Gallery is some of the artwork that I've created since beginning my PhD. And in considering what I was going to do for this exhibition, I looked back through all of that work, and I became aware of a gridded sort of aspect that was visible, or a variation on a grid that was visible in a lot of the works that I'd produced. And that was not something that I had done intentionally, that it just appeared within the work. So I thought that I would recontextualize these pieces by pulling this work together and making the installation downstairs. Most of the pieces that are down there were made for different projects and for different premise. This one work in particular I'm showing you because this is a bit of a divergence from how I usually work. It still is the replicated image, and in fact, the original image that makes this piece, it wasn't working curatorially with the rest of the images that I had selected for the installation downstairs. So I either had to jettison the image or come up with a new image. And that's the divergence. I've never before created a work that was based on a curatorial concern. So by doing this, I was able to use this original image that I wanted to use, and yet I found this new sort of way of making work. Right. By creating a digital I just said that, okay. So in effect, all of this work continues what is sort of a genetic helix that entangles theory and practice together within my artwork and within my praxis. Thank you.